On a crisp autumn night under the indifferent glow of a streetlight in the affluent suburb of Whispering Pines, two worlds collided. One world belonged to Officer Jack Corrigan, a man whose badge was a shield and whose authority was a hammer, seeing every citizen as a potential nail. The other belonged to Federal Judge Arthur Vance, a man who had dedicated his life to the nuanced scales of justice. A routine traffic stop, a moment of pride, and a flash of aggression ignited a firestorm that would consume careers, expose a city's secrets, and redefine the very meaning of power. This isn't just a story of a cop and a judge. It's a story of what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and the true brutal nature of karma is revealed. The night air in Oakwood City was cool and carried the scent of distant wood smoke. Officer Jack Corrigan loved this time of night. The 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift was where the real police work happened, or so he told himself. The freaks, the crooks, the drunks. They all crawled out after dark, and he was the shepherd who culled the flock. His partner for the past 6 months. Officer Chloe Davis, a rookie, barely 2 years on the force, sat in the passenger seat, nursing a lukewarm coffee. She found the silence in the patrol car more unnerving than the occasional shouts from a distant bar. Corrigan's eyes, honed by 15 years on the force and 2 tours in Afghanistan, scanned every vehicle with predatory focus. He saw a late-model Lincoln Continental, the kind of car that screamed old money, glide through the intersection at Elm Street and 4th Avenue. It didn't screech to a halt, but it didn't come to a full 3-second textbook stop either. It was a rolling stop, a California stop. An infraction so minor 99 out of 100 cops on a quiet Tuesday night would have let it slide. Corrigan was the one. "Look at this guy." Corrigan grunted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Thinks he owns the road." He flicked on the overhead lights. The brilliant strobes of red and blue sliced through the darkness, painting the stately brick homes of Whispering Pines in frantic colors. The Lincoln signaled immediately and pulled over to the curb, its movements smooth and unhurried. "Probably some lawyer," Chloe Davis offered, her voice soft. "Let's just give him a warning, Jack. The paperwork is a nightmare." "Paperwork is the job, Davis." Corrigan snapped, his voice already edged with the confrontational tone he reserved for the public. "The job is enforcing the law. All of it. For everyone." He put the car in park and unbuckled his seatbelt with a loud click. "Stay in the car. I'll handle this." He approached the Lincoln, his hand resting casually on the butt of his Glock, a habit that was more for intimidation than safety. He tapped on the driver's side window with a heavy knuckle. The window descended silently, revealing a man in his late 60s with a neatly trimmed silver beard, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a tweed jacket over a collared shirt. He looked more like a university professor than a threat. "License and registration," Corrigan said, his voice flat and devoid of any courtesy. The driver, Arthur Vance, reached calmly for the glove compartment. "Of course, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop?" His voice was deep and resonant, the kind of voice accustomed to commanding a room with quiet authority. "You ran the stop sign back there," Corrigan said, shining his flashlight into Vance's face. "I believe I came to a full stop, officer," Vance replied, his tone even. "Perhaps not for as long as you would have preferred, but the vehicle's momentum ceased." Corrigan's jaw tightened. He hated it when they argued, especially these silver-tongued rich types from the hills. "Are you a lawyer?" he sneered. "I am familiar with the law." "Yes," Vance said, handing over his driver's license, and a black leather bifold containing his registration and insurance card. Corrigan snatched the documents. He scanned the license. Arthur Vance. The name meant nothing to him. He glanced at the registration, then did a double-take. Tucked behind the insurance card was another form of identification. A gold-embossed card with the seal of the United States Judiciary. The Honorable Arthur Vance, United States District Judge. District of Northwood. A flicker of something surprise hesitation crossed Corrigan's face before being replaced by a mask of even deeper resentment. A judge. A federal judge, one of them. The ones who sat in their ivory towers coddling criminals and hamstringing cops with technicalities. This wasn't a reason to back off. It was a reason to press harder. He was making an example. No one was above the law. He walked back to the patrol car, his boots crunching on the asphalt. He tossed the documents onto the passenger seat. "Get this," he said to Davis, a grim smile playing on his lips. "He's a Fed." Chloe picked up the ID card. Her eyes widened. A federal judge Jack for a rolling stop. Maybe we should just let this go, apologize for the misunderstanding. "What misunderstanding?" Corrigan barked, his voice rising. "He broke the law. I saw it. You saw it. His title doesn't make him immune. In fact, it means he should know better." He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch running a license, Vance, V-A-N-C-E, Arthur J." The radio crackled back a few moments later. The license was clean. No warrants, no priors. The registration was valid. "See nothing," Chloe said, her voice pleading. "Let's just write the ticket and go. Or a warning. Please, Jack." But Corrigan was already out of the car. He had decided how this was going to go. He was going to wipe the smug, superior look off that judge's face. He strode back to the Lincoln. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Arthur Vance looked up, his calm demeanor finally showing a crack of surprise. "For what reason, officer, I have provided my documentation. You have run my information. I am not under arrest. I need to ensure my safety and conduct a proper investigation." Corrigan recited the words, hollow and rote. "Now step out of the car." "Officer," Vance said, his voice firming, the judge taking over. "You have no probable cause to search my vehicle, and you have no reasonable suspicion that I am armed or dangerous. Your order is unlawful. I will remain in my car." That was it. The challenge. The refusal. In Corrigan's world, that was resisting. "Sir, I am giving you a lawful order to exit the vehicle. Step out now, or I will remove you." Corrigan's hand was off his gun and on his taser. Chloe Davis was out of the patrol car now, her face pale. "Jack, don't!" But Corrigan wasn't listening. He reached through the open window, fumbled for the door handle, and yanked the door open. "Last chance, old man. I am Judge Arthur Vance of the United States District Court," Vance said, his voice ringing with an authority that had silenced hardened criminals. "And you are conducting an illegal stop and threatening a federal judicial officer. I would advise you to reconsider your actions very carefully, officer." The mention of his title again was like gasoline on a fire for Corrigan. It was a threat, an attempt to use his power. "You're a citizen on my street and you're obstructing my investigation," Corrigan yelled. He grabbed Vance's arm. "Take your hand off me," Vance commanded, his voice dropping to an icy calm. Corrigan didn't hesitate. He pulled the 68-year-old judge from the car. Vance stumbled, caught off balance. Before he could regain his footing, Corrigan had spun him around and slammed him against the side of the Lincoln. The sound of Vance's head making contact with the metal was a dull, sickening thud. Chloe gasped. "Jack! My God!" Corrigan ignored her. He wrenched Vance's arms behind his back, the judge groaning in pain as his shoulder was twisted at an awkward angle. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. "Arthur Vance," Corrigan said, his voice thick with adrenaline and triumph as he read him his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent." As the words washed over him, Judge Vance, his cheek pressed against the cold metal of his own car, wasn't thinking about the law. He was thinking about the irony. For 30 years he had sent men to jail, always with due process, with respect for the law he cherished. Now he was in handcuffs on the side of a dark road, the victim of a man who saw the law as nothing more than a club. The night was no longer quiet. It was screaming with injustice. The ride to the 17th precinct was silent and suffocating. Judge Vance sat in the back of the patrol car, the cage separating him from the two officers, feeling like a profound symbol of the chasm that had just opened in his life. His head throbbed where it had hit the car door, and a sharp pain shot through his right shoulder every time the car hit a bump. He remained silent, his mind a whirlwind of legal precedent, constitutional law, and a cold rising anger he hadn't felt in decades. Officer Chloe Davis kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her expression a mixture of fear and profound regret. She wanted to say something to apologize, to tell the man in the back that this wasn't right. But one look at Corrigan's rigid profile silenced her. He was driving with a self-satisfied smirk, convinced he had just struck a blow for the common man against the privileged elite. When they arrived at the precinct, a tired, grimy building that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, Corrigan hauled Judge Vance out of the car with unnecessary force. He paraded him through the sally port and into the booking area as if he were a prize catch. "Got a live one tonight," Corrigan announced to the room at large. The booking sergeant, a heavy-set, jaded man named Peterson, looked up from his crossword puzzle unimpressed. "What's the charge, Jack?" Peterson grunted. "Resisting arrest, obstruction of a government official, and I'm thinking about adding intimidating a public servant," Corrigan said loudly for Vance's benefit. Peterson looked at the elderly man in the tweed jacket, his glasses slightly askew, a faint bruise already purpling on his temple. "Looks real intimidating," the sergeant mumbled sarcastically, earning a glare from Corrigan. "Just book him," Corrigan ordered. "Empty your pockets. Belt, shoelaces, everything." Judge Vance stood still. "I would like to make my phone call," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "You'll get your call when I say you get it," Corrigan shot back. "Now pockets." "Sergeant," Vance said, ignoring Corrigan and addressing Peterson directly. "My name is Arthur Vance. I am a federal judge. This officer has illegally detained me and assaulted me. I am requesting my legal right to one phone call. I am also requesting immediate medical attention for injuries sustained during my arrest." The word judge finally seemed to penetrate Sergeant Peterson's weary cynicism. He looked from Vance to Corrigan, a new unease dawning in his eyes. This was not some drunk or junkie. This had the potential to be a mountain of trouble. "Jack, what the hell is this?" Peterson asked, lowering his voice. "He's a nobody trying to pull rank," Corrigan insisted. "I got it all on my body cam. He refused a lawful order. He resisted. He's a federal judge," Chloe Davis whispered from behind Corrigan, her voice barely audible. "We saw his ID." Peterson's face went pale. He stood up. "Get him a phone. Now!" Corrigan, furious at being undermined, shoved a dirty precinct phone toward Vance. "One call. Make it quick." Judge Vance didn't call a high-priced defense attorney from Covington and Strauss. He didn't call his son, who was a doctor in Chicago. He dialed a number he knew by heart. After 2 rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Sterling?" "Frank, it's Arthur," Vance said. There was a pause on the other end, then the voice was instantly alert. "Arthur, it's 1 in the morning. Is everything all right?" Frank Sterling was the Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal for the District of Northwood. The U.S. Marshal Service is responsible for the protection of the federal judiciary. "Not exactly," Vance replied, his voice a masterpiece of understatement. "I'm at the Oakwood Police Department, 17th Precinct. I've been arrested." There was a stunned silence, then the sound of rustling as if Sterling were throwing on clothes. "Arrested for what?" The initial pretext was a rolling stop. It escalated from there. The arresting officer is one Jack Corrigan. "Are you hurt?" Sterling's voice was now hard as iron. "I have a few bumps and bruises," Vance admitted. "They seem disinclined to offer medical attention." "Don't say another word, Arthur. To anyone. I'm on my way. I'm making 2 calls on the way. 1 to the director and 1 to the local FBI field office. Sit tight." The line went dead. Vance placed the receiver back in its cradle. He looked at Corrigan, whose face was a mask of confusion and dawning horror. The name Frank Sterling and the tone of the conversation had finally registered. "Who was that?" Corrigan demanded. "The man you'll be explaining your actions to," Vance said calmly. Panic began to replace bravado. Corrigan turned to Sergeant Peterson. "He's bluffing. Process him." But Peterson was already backing away, holding his hands up. "This is way above my pay grade, Jack. This is on you." He picked up his own phone and made a call to the precinct captain. 20 minutes later, Captain Howard, a man whose career was built on avoiding controversy, arrived in a flurry of sweat and anxiety, pulling on a rumpled blazer over a polo shirt. "What in God's name is going on? Corrigan!" He bellowed, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, the cuffed judge, the terrified rookie, and Corrigan, who was now trying to project an air of defiant confidence. "Captain, the suspect was non-compliant. He's a federal judge, you idiot," Howard hissed, his voice a strained whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The U.S. Marshals are on their way here. The FBI has been notified. This isn't just a complaint anymore. This is a federal incident." The front doors of the precinct swung open. 2 men in sharp suits entered, their badges clipped to their belts. They were U.S. Marshals. They were followed moments later by Frank Sterling himself, a tall, imposing man with an expression that could curdle milk. Sterling's eyes found Judge Vance immediately. He strode over, his gaze sweeping over the handcuffs and the bruise on Vance's temple. His face was grim. "Judge, are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and filled with controlled fury. "I will be frank," Vance said. Sterling turned to Captain Howard. "I am Chief Deputy Marshal Frank Sterling. Release him now." It was not a request. "Of course, Marshal, right away," Howard stammered, fumbling for the handcuff key. He unlocked the cuffs from Vance's wrists. Sterling gently helped the judge into a chair. "We'll have a medic check you out right here." He then fixed his gaze on Officer Corrigan, who suddenly looked very small and very alone. "You," Sterling said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Officer Jack Corrigan. You are going to have a very, very bad night. And it's only just beginning." He turned to one of his deputies. "Secure the body camera footage from this officer and his partner. Secure the dash cam footage from their vehicle. Secure all precinct security tapes from the moment they arrived. No one touches anything. This is now a federal investigation." Corrigan felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been shattered. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. And the men who had just walked into his precinct were the kind of predators he had never faced before. The storm broke before dawn. News travels fast in a city, but news of a federal judge being arrested and assaulted by a local cop travels at the speed of light. By 4 a.m., a news van from a local 24-hour channel was parked across the street from the 17th precinct. By 6 a.m., Jessica Finch, the top investigative reporter for the Oakwood Chronicle, was on the phone with a source inside the mayor's office who was practically vibrating with panic. "They're calling it an incident," the source whispered. "The mayor, the police chief, the city attorney. They've been on a conference call since 3. They're trying to get ahead of it, but it's already out. The feds are involved. The Department of Justice is being looped in. This is a Category 5 Hurricane Jessica." Jessica Finch felt the familiar thrill of a major story. Who's the cop? Who's the judge? Judge Arthur Vance. The cop is some guy named Corrigan. Jack Corrigan. Apparently he's got a bit of a reputation. "A reputation," Jessica repeated, already typing furiously. "What kind of reputation?" That was the question that would unravel everything. Inside the precinct, a new reality had set in. Judge Vance had been whisked away by the marshals, but not before being examined by an EMT and giving a preliminary statement to 2 stone-faced FBI agents in a private room. Officer Corrigan was formally placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. He was ordered to turn in his badge and service weapon. The act of unclipping his badge felt like shedding his own skin. For 15 years it had defined him. It was his identity, his authority, his purpose. As he handed it over to a grim-faced Captain Howard, he felt naked and powerless. "Go home, Jack." Howard said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Don't talk to anyone. And for God's sake, get a lawyer. Not your union rep. A real lawyer." The drive home was a blur. The usual morning traffic seemed to mock him, full of ordinary people going to ordinary jobs, oblivious to the fact that his world had just imploded. When he walked into his modest suburban home, his wife Sarah was in the kitchen packing their kids' lunches. "You're home early," she said, smiling, then her smile faded as she saw his face. "Jack, what's wrong? Are you okay?" He couldn't bring himself to say the words. "There was an incident at work," he mumbled, collapsing into a kitchen chair. "I'm on leave." The official story, carefully crafted by the city's damage control team, was released at 9 a.m. It spoke of a regrettable interaction during a traffic stop, an ongoing investigation, and assured the public of their commitment to transparency and accountability. It was a bland corporate statement designed to quell the fire, but it only acted as fuel. Jessica Finch read it and laughed. "Regrettable interaction," she muttered to her editor. "That's like calling the Titanic a boating mishap." Her investigation began with a deep dive into Officer Jack Corrigan's personnel file. Officially, it was sealed. But Jessica had spent years cultivating sources within the Oakwood PD's Bureau of Professional Standards. A late-night meeting in a deserted parking garage with a disgruntled records clerk yielded a treasure trove, a plain manila envelope filled with photocopied documents. Corrigan's file was thick. Over his 15-year career, he had accumulated 19 citizen complaints. 12 of them were for excessive force. 4 were for verbal abuse and intimidation. 3 were for illegal searches. He had been decorated for bravery twice, which was always the first thing the department mentioned. But the complaints told a different story. A pattern of behavior emerged, Corrigan targeting individuals who questioned his authority, escalating minor encounters into physical confrontations, and writing reports that consistently painted him as the calm professional facing an unhinged aggressor. Crucially, none of the 19 complaints had ever been sustained. They were all dismissed as unfounded or exonerated, or often with a note from his union representative praising his proactive policing. The system hadn't just failed to stop him, it had actively protected and enabled him. Jessica's next target was Officer Chloe Davis. She found her name listed as the partner in the Vance incident report. A young cop likely terrified and caught in the middle. Jessica got her cell number and called. "Officer Davis, my name is Jessica Finch from the Oakwood Chronicle." "I can't talk to you," Chloe said immediately, her voice trembling. "I've been ordered not to." "I'm not asking for an official statement," Jessica said gently. "I'm trying to understand what happened. I've seen Officer Corrigan's file. I know there's more to this story. People deserve to know the truth. You became a cop to uphold the law, right? What happens when the person breaking it is standing next to you?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I can't," Chloe whispered and hung up. But Jessica had planted a seed. That evening, as Chloe sat in her apartment replaying the night's events, in her mind, the judge's calm voice, the sickening thud of his head against the car. Corrigan's triumphant sneer, her conscience gnawed at her. She had sworn an oath. Was her loyalty to a corrupt partner, or to the principles she had promised to uphold? Meanwhile, the federal machine was grinding into motion. The FBI, operating out of the Robert F. Kennedy Federal Building downtown, had opened a full civil rights investigation. They weren't just looking at the arrest of Judge Vance. They were now investigating a potential pattern or practice of misconduct within the Oakwood Police Department, with Officer Corrigan as their entry point. U.S. Attorney for the district, a formidable woman named Maria Sandoval, held a press conference. The alleged actions against a member of our federal judiciary strike at the heart of the rule of law. Sandoval stated, her face stern. "Let me be clear, no one is above the law. Not the citizens on our streets, and not the officers who swear to protect them. This investigation will be thorough, and it will go wherever the evidence leads." For Jack Corrigan, watching the press conference on his living room television, the walls felt like they were closing in. His union rep had called, sounding nervous, advising him to keep quiet. His phone buzzed with texts from fellow officers, some offering support, others asking what the hell he had been thinking. He felt a surge of defiant rage. He had done his job. He had treated the judge like any other citizen. Wasn't that what they were always screaming for? Equal justice. He didn't see the hypocrisy. He didn't see that his version of equal justice was to drag everyone down to the level of fear and intimidation he believed necessary to maintain order. That night, Chloe Davis called Jessica Finch from a burner phone. "Meet me at the diner on West 3rd in an hour," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'll tell you everything." The unraveling was just beginning. The Greasy Spoon Diner on West 3rd was bathed in the harsh, flickering light of a neon sign that had seen better decades. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting, anonymous, forgettable. Jessica Finch sat in a corner booth, a cold cup of coffee in front of her, her digital recorder hidden in her purse. Officer Chloe Davis slid into the booth opposite her, pulling the hood of her sweatshirt low over her face. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes darted around the room nervously. "Thank you for coming," Jessica said softly. "I shouldn't be here," Chloe whispered. "If they find out I talked to you, my career is over." "Or maybe," Jessica countered, "it's just beginning. Tell me what happened, Chloe. From the start." For the next hour, Chloe recounted the events of the traffic stop in painstaking detail. She described Corrigan's immediate hostility, his obsession with the minor infraction, and his contemptuous reaction when he discovered Vance was a judge. She spoke of her own attempts to de-escalate the situation, and Corrigan's refusal to listen. Her voice broke when she described him pulling Judge Vance from the car and slamming him against it. "He didn't just arrest him," Chloe said, tears welling in her eyes. "He wanted to humiliate him. He enjoyed it. And the worst part is, I've seen him do it before. Not to a judge, but to others. A kid he thought gave him a dirty look. A homeless man who wouldn't move fast enough. He calls it asserting authority. I call it bullying." She then confirmed what Jessica had suspected from the internal files. "The complaints get buried," Chloe explained. "Jack is tight with the union president, Bill Finnegan. Finnegan sees guys like Jack as heroes, the last line of defense against chaos. So the union fights every complaint tooth and nail. They intimidate witnesses. They find procedural loopholes. They get the reports rewritten. The captains go along with it because it's easier than fighting the union, and Jack's arrest numbers are good for the precinct's stats." This was the smoking gun. It wasn't just a rogue cop. It was a systemic failure. A culture of impunity, protected by the union and tolerated by the command staff. Jessica published her story the next day. The headline, plastered across the front page of the Oakwood Chronicle, was "Explosive Rotten System, Oakwood PD and Police Union Accused of Shielding Aggressive Cop in Judge Vance Assault." The article was a bombshell. It detailed not only the assault on Judge Vance, but also laid out the pattern of Corrigan's past conduct, citing the number of complaints against him. Most damningly, it included quotes from an anonymous serving officer, Chloe Davis, describing a culture where excessive force was protected and whistleblowers were silenced. The public outcry was immediate and immense. Protesters gathered outside City Hall and the 17th Precinct, holding signs that read, "Accountability Now" and "Fire Corrigan." The mayor's office was inundated with calls. The story was picked up by national news outlets, and Oakwood City became a byword for police misconduct. The pressure on the city was unbearable. The mayor and police chief, who had hoped to contain the damage with an internal investigation, were now facing a full-blown crisis of public trust. More importantly, they were facing the unblinking stare of the federal government. The FBI's investigation, bolstered by Jessica's reporting and Chloe's now formal testimony. She had gone to the FBI with a lawyer the day the article was published, expanded dramatically. Federal agents armed with subpoenas descended on the Oakwood PD headquarters. They seized years of internal affairs files, emails from police commanders, and records from the police union. They were no longer just building a case against Jack Corrigan. They were building a case against the entire department. For Jack Corrigan, the world shrank to the four walls of his house. His wife, Sarah, after reading the article and the horrific details of his past complaints, looked at him with eyes he no longer recognized. They were filled not with love, but with fear and revulsion. "Is it true, Jack?" she had asked, holding the newspaper with trembling hands. "All those other times, did you do those things?" His denial was weak, pathetic, even to his own ears. "It's complicated. You don't understand what it's like out there." "I understand right and wrong," she had said, her voice cold. Their home, once a sanctuary, became a silent battlefield. His lawyer, a sharp, expensive attorney named Robert Peterson, no relation to the booking sergeant paid for by the now panicked police union, was grim. "They're not just looking at you for assault and unlawful restraint anymore, Jack. Peterson told him in his sleek downtown office. The U.S. Attorney is preparing a federal indictment, Section 242 of Title 18, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. The same statute they use for Klansmen. They're going to make an example of you. Corrigan felt the blood drain from his face. But the Union. The Union can't protect you from the FBI, Peterson said flatly. Their priority right now is protecting themselves from a racketeering charge for covering up civil rights violations for years. You, my friend, are being cut loose. Meanwhile, Judge Arthur Vance was recovering at home. The physical bruises were fading, but the psychological impact remained. He had been inundated with messages of support from colleagues, lawyers, and even former defendants who respected his fairness. He politely declined all interview requests, but he was not idle. He spent his days in his home library, not researching his own case, but studying the broader issues it had exposed: qualified immunity police union contracts and civilian oversight boards. He felt a profound responsibility. His status had brought this issue to light, but he knew that hundreds of others, without his title or resources, had suffered in silence at the hands of officers like Corrigan. His ordeal could not just be about him. It had to mean something more. The investigation had laid the groundwork. The city was braced for impact. The press, the public, and the federal government were all watching. The only thing left was for the hammer of justice, the real impartial justice that Judge Vance had championed his entire life, to fall. Karma Judge Vance had often thought was not a mystical force, but rather a form of cold, inevitable arithmetic. It was the logical sum of one's actions. For Jack Corrigan, the bill had come due, and the final accounting was brutal. The first blow came from the institution he had sworn to serve. Following a perfunctory and swift internal hearing, the Oakwood Police Department officially terminated his employment. The ceremony was devoid of honor. He was handed his final paycheck in a brown envelope by a junior HR clerk who refused to make eye contact. The 15 years of service, the commendations, the hero cop narrative he had built for himself, all erased by a single signature on a termination letter. The second, more devastating blow came from the federal government. A grand jury, after hearing testimony from Chloe Davis, reviewing the mountain of evidence gathered by the FBI, and even seeing the precinct footage of Corrigan's smug demeanor, handed down a 2-count indictment. Count 1. Deprivation of rights under color of law for the assault and unlawful arrest of Judge Arthur Vance. Count 2. Falsification of an official report for lying in his initial summary of the incident. The arrest was a quiet affair. 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman, showed up at his front door one morning. They were polite, professional, and utterly implacable. There was no shouting, no struggle. Jack Corrigan, the man who had put hundreds of people in handcuffs, now felt the familiar cold click of steel on his own wrists. His wife watched from the doorway, her face a blank mask before quietly closing the door on him. As he was led to the unmarked sedan, he saw his neighbor peer out through the blinds, a flicker of shame twisting in his gut. This was the humiliation he had so enjoyed inflicting on others, now served back to him on a silver platter. His trial was a media sensation. U.S. Attorney Maria Sandoval prosecuted the case herself. She methodically dismantled Corrigan's defense. His body camera footage, which he had smugly told Chloe would protect him, became the star exhibit for the prosecution. The jury saw his escalating aggression, heard his contemptuous tone, and watched him lie to Vance about the legality of his orders. Chloe Davis was the key witness. On the stand, she was composed and credible, her voice clear as she recounted the night's events and the broader culture of impunity within the department. Corrigan's lawyer tried to paint her as a disgruntled rookie looking to advance her career, but her sincerity was unshakable. The final witness was Judge Arthur Vance. He walked to the stand not as a victim seeking revenge, but as an officer of the court fulfilling his duty. He described the events calmly and factually. During cross-examination, Corrigan's lawyer tried to bait him. "Judge," the lawyer began, "you more than anyone know that police officers have a difficult job. They have to make split-second decisions. Isn't it possible that Officer Corrigan simply made a mistake in a high-pressure situation?" Vance looked directly at the jury. "It is possible for an officer to make a mistake," he said, his voice resonant. "What is not a mistake is a pattern of behavior. What is not a mistake is the belief that a badge grants you the authority to humiliate and assault a citizen because they question you. The rule of law is not a suggestion. It is the bedrock of our society. It must apply to everyone from the person in the homeless shelter to the judge on the federal bench, and it must apply most especially to those we entrust to enforce it." The jury was out for less than 3 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. At his sentencing, Jack Corrigan, the once proud officer, stood before a federal judge, a colleague of Vance's, a broken man. He tried to read a prepared statement, his voice cracking. He spoke of his military service, of the stress of the job, of his love for his family, who were not present in the courtroom. But his words were hollow. The judge was unmoved. "Mr. Corrigan," he said, his voice stern, "you did not just assault a man. You assaulted the very principles you swore an oath to protect. You used your authority not as a shield to protect the innocent, but as a club to beat down anyone you deemed disrespectful. You are a disgrace to your badge." He was sentenced to 48 months in a federal penitentiary, 4 years. Jack Corrigan, the tough guy, the street cop who sneered at the criminals. He locked up, fainted when he heard the sentence. He had to be helped from the courtroom by the U.S. Marshals. The fallout didn't end with him. The pattern or practice investigation by the Department of Justice resulted in a consent decree being imposed on the Oakwood Police Department. This legally binding agreement mandated sweeping reforms, new use-of-force policies, enhanced de-escalation training. The creation of a powerful independent civilian oversight board and a complete overhaul of the internal affairs and disciplinary systems. Police Union President Bill Finnegan was forced to resign amidst the scandal. Captain Howard took an early retirement. The 17th Precinct was given a new commander, a reform-minded captain from outside the city. Chloe Davis, once a fearful rookie, became a symbol of integrity. She was ostracized by some of the old guard, but respected by the new leadership. She was promoted to detective and assigned to the Internal Affairs Division, now called the Bureau of Professional Standards, tasked with helping to ensure that what happened to Judge Vance would never happen again. Jessica Finch won the prestigious Polk Award for her reporting, which was credited with forcing the systemic changes. Months later, Judge Vance sat in his chambers looking out over the city. He had been cleared to return to the bench and was presiding over a complex corporate fraud case. His ordeal had changed him, deepened his already profound commitment to justice. He picked up a pen and began to draft a law review article, not about his own case, but about the doctrine of qualified immunity, arguing for its reform. His pain had been forged into purpose. The story of Officer Corrigan and Judge Vance became a local legend, a cautionary tale taught to every new recruit at the Oakwood Police Academy. It was a story about how a single moment of unchecked aggression, a single abuse of power, could bring down not just one man, but an entire corrupt system. It was a stark and powerful reminder that in the grand impartial courtroom of life, karma is the one judge from whom there is no appeal. 2 years after the verdict, the echoes of that single traffic stop on Elm Street had not faded. They had simply changed their frequency, resonating in the quiet, unseen corners of the lives it had irrevocably altered. The public spectacle was over, the headlines had moved on, but the consequences continued their slow, grinding work. For Jack Corrigan, the world had shrunk to a 6 by 9 foot concrete box in the Federal Correctional Institution, Petersburg Low. The bravado that had defined him on the streets of Oakwood City had evaporated in the sterile, unyielding environment of federal prison. Here, his identity as a cop was not a source of power, but a mark of Cain. He was no longer Officer Corrigan. He was inmate 73408-083. His days were a monotonous loop of regulated misery. The 6 a.m. wake-up call, the metallic taste of powdered eggs, the mind-numbing work in the prison laundry, folding sheets and uniforms for hours on end, surrounded by the quiet hum of machinery and the wary glances of other inmates. In the beginning, there had been threats, muttered insults in the chow line, a shoulder check in the yard. But Corrigan, stripped of his badge and gun, learned a new skill in visibility. He kept his eyes down, his mouth shut, and his thoughts to himself. The aggressive alpha, who had dominated his precinct, had been replaced by a ghost haunted by the memory of his own authority. His true prison was the silence of the nights. Lying on his thin mattress, listening to the distant clang of a steel door or a cough from another cell, he was relentlessly pursued by his own reflection. He saw Judge Vance's calm, questioning eyes. He heard the sickening thud of a head against a car door. He replayed the scene 1,000 times, but the script had been twisted by hindsight. The smug satisfaction he had felt was gone, replaced by a gnawing, confusing shame. He had thrown away his life, his career, his family, his freedom for what? To win an argument, to put a rich guy in his place. Sarah had divorced him 6 months into his sentence. Her letters had stopped first, then the money in his commissary account. The final decree arrived by mail, a cold legal document that severed the last tie to his old life. His children, he heard through a rumor from his sister's one and only reluctant phone call, no longer used his last name at school. He was an anecdote they were trying to forget. One afternoon in the prison library, a place he frequented for the illusion of solitude, he stumbled upon a tattered copy of a legal journal. On the cover was an article titled, "The Corrosive Shield, Rethinking Qualified Immunity in a New Era of Accountability." The author was Judge Arthur Vance. Curiosity, morbid and self-flagellating, compelled him to read it. He didn't understand all the legal theory, the citations to precedent, the intricate arguments. But he understood the core message. Vance wasn't writing about him. Not really. He was writing about the system that created him. A system that insulated officers from the consequences of their actions, fostering a culture where asserting authority could curdle into abuse. For the first time, Corrigan saw his actions not as an isolated incident of a bad night, but as the predictable result of a flawed design. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation, and in the bleak landscape of his life, even that was a sliver of light. That night, for the first time in over a year, he requested a piece of paper and a pen from a guard. He began to write, his hand clumsy and unpracticed. It was not eloquent. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a clumsy, raw, and deeply painful attempt to articulate the hollowed-out space where his pride used to be. Far from the grim walls of FCI Petersburg, Judge Arthur Vance stood at a lectern at Yale Law School. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and legal scholars. His law review article had become required reading in constitutional law classes across the country, and he had become an unlikely and somewhat reluctant icon for the police reform movement. "The law is a promise," he said, his voice as calm and resonant as ever, though now tinged with a new, more personal gravity. "It is a promise of equal application of fairness, of a shield against the arbitrary exercise of power. When an agent of the state, cloaked in its authority, breaks that promise, they do more than harm an individual. They fracture the trust upon which our entire civil society is built. The damage is not personal. It is systemic." He spoke for an hour not of his own ordeal, but of the philosophical and legal principles at stake. He argued not for the abolition of policing, but for the strengthening of its constitutional guardrails. He advocated for a version of justice that was not about revenge, but about restoration, restoring faith, restoring balance, restoring the promise. When he finished, the applause was thunderous and sustained. It was a validation not for him, but for the ideas he now championed. Later, back in his hotel room, he looked at a framed photo on the nightstand. It was of his late wife, Maria. He found himself talking to her, as he often did in quiet moments. "I think you would have been proud, my dear," he whispered. "We always said the law had to have a soul. I'm doing my best to make sure it does." A week later, a letter arrived at his chambers. It was postmarked from Petersburg, Virginia. The handwriting on the envelope was blocky and uncertain. His clerk, a sharp young woman named Sarah, a coincidence that did not escape him, had set it aside unsure if he would want to see it. Vance recognized the name on the return address, immediately J. Corrigan. He took the letter into his private office and closed the door. He sat for a long time just looking at it. He felt no anger, no fear, only a profound sense of melancholy for the waste of it all. He finally slit it open. The letter was short, barely a full page. It was full of misspellings and crossed-out words. It was a rambling, disjointed mix of self-pity and nascent regret. Corrigan wrote that he was sorry for what happened, not because he was caught, but because he finally got it. He wrote that reading the judge's article in the library was like looking in a cracked mirror. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make excuses. He ended with a simple, stark sentence: "I lost everything I thought I was." Judge Vance read the letter twice. He folded it carefully and placed it in a desk drawer. He would not respond. The correspondence was not with him. It was a letter Jack Corrigan had needed to write to himself. The judge's work was elsewhere. His path was forward toward reforming the system. Corrigan's path, if he was ever to find one, was backward through the wreckage of his own making. In Oakwood City, the system was in fact changing. The consent decree was a bitter pill for many in the Oakwood PD, but it was medicine the department desperately needed. And at the heart of its administration was Detective Chloe Davis. Her office in the Bureau of Professional Standards was small and unremarkable, but it was the new nerve center of accountability. Her promotion had been met with a cold shoulder from many veteran officers. They called her Saint Chloe, behind her back, the Fed's pet. But for the new generation of cops, the ones who had come in after the scandal, she was a role model. Chloe was investigating a case involving a young officer named Ramirez, who was accused of using a chokehold during an arrest, a direct violation of the new use of force policy. The officer claimed the suspect was resisting violently. The body camera footage was ambiguous. It was the kind of case that 3 years ago would have been instantly dismissed. Chloe worked it relentlessly. She interviewed every witness. She re-examined the footage frame by frame. She brought in a use-of-force expert to analyze the physical dynamics of the struggle. She felt the old pressures, the subtle hints from the union rep, to drop it the us versus them mentality that still lingered in the precinct's DNA. But she also felt the new support. The new police chief, a woman brought in from Milwaukee with a reputation as a reformer, called Chloe into her office. "How's the Ramirez case coming, Detective?" Chief Abrams asked, her gaze direct. "It's tough, Chief. It's his word against the suspects, and the video isn't definitive." "I don't care if it's tough," Abrams said, leaning forward. "I care if it's thorough. The old way was to protect our own, no matter what. The new way is to protect the integrity of the badge. That means holding everyone, including ourselves, to the highest standard. Whatever your investigation finds, I will back it up. Do you understand?" "Yes, Chief," Chloe said, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "I do." Leaving the chief's office, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had made the right choice that night on Elm Street. It had been the hardest decision of her life, but it had put her on the right side of history. She was no longer just a cop. She was a guardian of the department's fragile, recovering soul. The echoes of that night were a constant reminder of the stakes. They were a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. But also, as she looked at the new, hopeful faces of the rookie class in the hallway, a testament to how things with courage and conviction could be made right. What you've just heard is more than a story of a bad cop getting his due. It's a real-life illustration of how fragile the rule of law can be and how crucial individual integrity is in preserving it. From Officer Chloe Davis's courageous decision to speak out to Jessica Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth, to Judge Vance's unwavering commitment to principle over personal vengeance, this story shows that systems only change when good people decide that enough is enough. The fall of Jack Corrigan wasn't just karma. It was the consequence of a community, a press, and a justice system that ultimately refused to look the other way. If this story shocked you, moved you, or made you think, please hit that like button to help us reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more incredible true stories that you won't find anywhere else. Your support helps us continue to bring these important narratives to light. Thank you for listening.